welcome to art. So as you can see, I have all 3 primary colors here ready for you today. And we're going to take our inspiration from some flowers that are in bloom right now. They're called marigolds. And we're going to do a watercolor painting inspired by these flowers, just using our 3 primary colors. And we're going to layer our watercolors so that using the transparency, the see-through nature of our paint, we can mix all the colors that we need. Orange, yellow, every shade in between. So let's get started.
The first thing we're going to do is take one of our sheets of watercolor paper and do a yellow wash on the background. So just take your yellow paint and fill it all the way up with yellow. While this dries, I'll read you a really nice story about mistakes. The Book of Mistakes. The Book of Mistakes. It started with one mistake. Making the other eye even bigger was another mistake. But the glasses, they were a good idea. The elbow and the extra long neck, mistakes. But the collar, ruffled with patterns of lace and stripes, that was a good idea. And the elbow patches, they were a good idea too. The bush was another good idea. Dark and leafy so that you couldn't see through it. To the frog, cat, cow thing, another mistake. The big space between the ground and the bottom of the girl's shoe was a little bit of a mistake too. But the roller skates, those were definitely not a mistake. The second frog, cat, cow thing made a very nice rock. And the girl with the very long leg looks like she was always meant to be climbing a tree. Even the ink smudges scattered across the sky look as if they could be leaves, like if they'd always wanted to be lifted up and carried. And what about the girl? Should we zoom in? Let's zoom in on this. Wow, look at everything going on in this picture. It's so cool. Do you see how with each mistake she is becoming? Do you see now who she could be? She's the artist who drew everything. Let's go back to her head. I want to see that again. That whole world is on top of her hat. Cool. Practice some watercolor techniques. And I'm just going to show you mine real quick. So do you see how I have all this really cool stuff happening on this side? Well, when I was making that, it kind of looked like weird puddles of paint that I couldn't really control, and maybe I felt a little bit like it was a mistake. But I didn't touch it, and I didn't rub it with a paper towel. You don't really ever want to do that to your painting. I just let it dry, and it looks different when it dries, and it looks really cool. I really like it now. So for this exercise, when we're practicing different watercolor techniques, try to, if you have some kind of interesting puddles and stuff, try to just leave them alone. Let them dry and see what happens. Now go ahead and grab your other white sheet of paper. So you need a fresh, clean piece of paper. This wouldn't be your yellow paper. And we're going to just practice a few things that you can do with watercolor paints. So take your yellow paint, or really any of your colors, and cover half your paper. So don't cover the whole thing with yellow. We're just going to cover part of it up with yellow. You can use a lot of paint here. We want it to be kind of wet. I like yellow because it's kind of a light color for our background and makes things stand out that I put on top of it. Now I'm going to take my blue and make a line going all the way across the paper. Do you see how on the wet side it kind of spreads out and bleeds? Let's let it do that and see how it looks when it dries. On the dry side, it's straighter and more controlled. I'll try the same thing with red. So there are two different kinds of things that watercolor paint can do. It can make soft lines, or it could make more detailed lines that are less fuzzy. Let's try it with some dots. There are some dots on the wet part of the paper, and there are the dots on the dry part of the paper. Do you see how different they are? So if you want to make something and have a lot of control over it, you will want to paint it on dry paper. If you want to get those cool effects, the soft fuzzy lines, then you'll paint on a wet area. Let me try a different kind of line. So if you don't want it to smush together, you have to let things dry before you paint on top, or use dry paper. But I like letting things smush together sometimes, and sometimes I don't want them to. So you can just use that piece of paper to just experiment and try different things and see how the paint reacts on the dry area and the wet area. Another thing I'd like you to practice is using the very tip of your brush to make a very thin line. So imagine your brush is a ballerina standing on her very tippy toes. That's how you're going to make that really skinny line with your brush. If you want to use the side, you can make a very wide line. So try those two things out too. So when you're done with that, it's time to start working on our yellow background. So put this painting to the side out of your way and pick up your yellow paper. Before we start painting, I'm going to just show you a few little things that you might want to try in your painting of these marigolds. So like I said before, when I put this red paint on top of the yellow background, it's kind of turning into an orangish color.
And especially when it dries, it's going to turn orange. Now you see the marks I'm making look different depending on what part of the brush I'm using. So I'm kind of using the side of the brush here, and now I'm using the very end. And so I can make a skinny line with the very end or a fatter line by using the side of the brush. Unlike drawing, you don't really want to change your line by changing the pressure that you put on the brush. You're always just pressing down very gently. If you want to make a different mark, you're really going to just change the angle of the brush. So you can use the whole side, you could use the very end, but never push down and smash your brush down onto the paper. That's just going to be hard to do. So here you see some of the flowers have like red in the middle. So what I did is I just grabbed some red with my brush and just gently tap the wet paint in the middle of the flower. So you could do that with red on yellow. You can do that with yellow on red. Whatever you want. Just be careful not to do it too much, or you'll kind of lose that effect when it dries. If you do it too much and just make a big puddle, that's what it's going to look like. It's going to look like a big puddle. Okay, now I'm ready to do the leaves. So I'm grabbing my blue paint, and when I put it on top of that yellow background, the blue, because it's see-through, is looking kind of like a blue-green color, which I really like. So notice that I'm making my shapes with the shapes that a brush can do. So I'm going pretty fast here, but you can see I'm using the very end of the brush just gently to make a thin line, and then the side of the brush makes those thicker lines that I'm using for the leaf shapes. So just kind of play around with your brush and see what kind of brush strokes it can make. Notice I didn't only put flowers along the bottom of my paper. I put some at the very top, some in the middle, and then others towards the bottom. So it's nice to fill your whole paper. I mean, why waste that beautiful empty space that we created with that yellow, right? So it's nice to fill your whole paper. So if something doesn't feel like it's gonna fit, well, you can make it go off the edge, or do any number of things, but try to fill the whole paper up. So here is a good example of me making really small lines with just the very end of the brush. So I'm going to try this. I'm going to drop some yellow into that wet paint so that kind of mixes together. And there's a nice red. We'll see what happens with that one. It's kind of a surprise when it dries.